Hello, Will. Welcome back to another episode of Imlight.
Love it. Excited for this one. It's one that I've been thinking about since the early days of our podcast. That, as a Chinese Canadian, I really wanted to have an episode for the roots, for the people. So
Been
this
putting
is
this
it.
off for too long, honestly.
But we've been waiting for too long. My name is Will Tao. I'm an immigration refugee lawyer here in Burnaby, British Columbia. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Kaikat nations, where our offices and homes are.
My name is Lou Dangzalin, and I'm an immigration lawyer based in Toronto. But today I am still currently in California, where I am in the traditional territories of the many peoples, the Muwekma, Miwok, and Yokuts in the San Joaquin Valley, just outside the Bay Area in San Francisco.
How I wish I was in the Bay right now. I love the Bay. I don't know if we have this conversation, but family stuff, but
you see, I'm not even sure if you want to be with the haze currently, unfortunately. Just like British Columbia, California is dealing with a lot of climate crisis-related wildfires, unfortunately. But without further ado, Will, I'm excited about today's episode for a few reasons, because as I said, we've been putting this off for too long. We need to do this.
Yeah, we need to talk China. We need to talk to Chinese diaspora, and we need to talk to someone who is themselves, in the process of immigrating to Canada, but also a journalist, a podcaster, a University of King's College journalism graduate. And, with the Chinese immigration numbers in Canada declining amid frosty relationships between our two countries, it's really, really important to separate the government from its people and try to better understand the nuances, complexities, and most importantly, the varied stories of this very large and expansive diaspora. So without further ado, I want to welcome someone I've been in communication with for a couple of years now virtually, and I'm excited to really meet and get to know for the first time. Lu Xu, I think her Chinese name is Xu Menglu. My Chinese is a little bit choppy, but welcome, Lu Xu. Lu, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Imlight podcast. We're so grateful to have you here.
Thank you for the invite. I'm really excited to talk more.
So Lou, as I was saying in the introduction, you and today we have two Lou's, so I'll be careful. LJ is going to be Lou Johnson, and you'll be Lou. So I want to talk to you about your journey. I know in the intro I introduced you as a podcaster, and I know podcasting in our community is still, I would say, relatively new, and it's a really brave job, I would say. Can you discuss your journey? How did you get to becoming a podcaster, and maybe where the journey started in your life?
Yeah, for sure. So, oh my God, where did I start? I came to Halifax about 5 years ago, and I took journalism, obviously. That's when I first started to be a little bit outspoken about my beliefs and, sort of being someone who's like telling stories. But I really never thought about starting my own podcast until very recently. I think I just got more comfortable being where I am right now, and just I love audio, and there's so much you can do with it, and so it just all came very naturally to me in the end, but it was quite a journey for sure.
Luke, can you talk to me about the first decision to come to the Maritimes and to Halifax? Where were you located when you first found out about maybe even this possible pathway for your career?
That's a really good question. I was in Melbourne in Australia. I was actually doing a completely irrelevant program. But I've always wanted to be a journalist. And of course that was never going to be possible, or I was never going to be safe and practice journalism the way I wanted to when I was in mainland China. That's where I grew up, and that's where I was a teenager, and I went to college and stuff, and I was in Melbourne, and I finally felt I registered for Facebook for the first time, and I felt like my adulthood just began. And I was doing a completely different program than in Melbourne. But I just felt like I wanted to pursue journalism. I really loved the idea of, telling stories and justice and all that. And I just met this person who did the exact same program that I did. And she's also Chinese. And we just started talking and, about the program, about everybody. And I said, I'm gonna apply. So I applied for the program. I had an interview with the I think Kelly Tohill, and she was the department director or something, and we had a really nice chat, and she just said yes on the spot, and like literally in a few weeks I was on a plane to Halifax. I knew nobody, absolutely nobody when I first came to Halifax, and it was 12 o'clock. I didn't even arrange a pickup. You know how you hail a taxi like in China? And apparently in Halifax, you can't do that. You don't hail a taxi. You have to call them. I did not know that. So it was the airport. I'm completely freaking out. It was like, am I gonna like get lost the first day here? But luckily I met somebody on the plane, and she said, you know, I have like somebody who's gonna pick me up. Do you want to ride? And I was like, absolutely. So yeah, so it was something that I always wanted to do, but really never had the chance or the opportunity. Like, you know, I've never met somebody. So when I was in Melbourne, I met this person. So that's how I came here. That's a long answer.
That's a long answer. It's a wonderful one, because I think one of the misconceptions right off the bat is individuals don't quite understand how many of us get to Canada as a destination, right? And stories like Lou, where first of all goes to another country first, goes to Australia, but even just, you know, the act of leaving it's not just the story of a wealthy sort of, you know, someone who's holding a lot of money and the parent just being like, kid, go to Canada for better opportunity. It's a little more complicated than that, right?
Totally. I this reminds me of one of my Facebook posts. It's while I was reading this book, obviously, you know, this is The Crazy Rich Asians. It was so phenomenal. Everybody loved it. And it was ironic because I'm not crazy rich and I'm Asian. And I was reading that book, and I think it's a great book and it's a great story, but it doesn't really tell, you know, there are a lot of stories that are not being told right now. There's definitely that stereotype of like, you know, all the Asian immigrants or people like us would be like, yeah, there's definitely a stereotype of that.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you about some of these Chinese stories for sure, stories of of your upbringing and of course some of my time in China. But let's talk about Polestar actually. And LJ, I don't know if you knew this, but Lou helped launch Polestar Immigration, which really was the gate, I would say the opener to this conversation about even African refusal rates and all of the policy issues. And of course, Kelly, who's a friend of mine as well.
Well,
so,
first of all, that's news to me. That's amazing. Big fan of Polestar, the work that you do over there. So yeah, go ahead, Will. You were talking about the refusal rates.
Well, I was just saying that, yeah, for Polestar Immigration really opened up the conversation on policy, and I started doing a little writing for them as well. So maybe Lou, talk to me a bit about how you started the advocacy for international students and where that came from, being an international student yourself at that time.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting topic, because I think international students are really vulnerable, especially in a small town like Halifax. Like in Toronto or Vancouver, there's a history of international students coming to the city. There's a history of, you know, immigrants just in general, from not just from China, but from all over the world. Whereas in Halifax, it's relatively small, and it definitely has that small town mentality where, you know, everything is kind of quieter, it goes under the radar. And when that happens, I think in a system, especially, you know, communities like international students or just simply sometimes new immigrants, they are the ones who got hit the hardest. So, and me being in that community, I saw a lot of things going on that it just wasn't addressed. Especially with immigration, because it can be really daunting. Like the process can be really hard, and starting a new life here in Halifax can also be hard. And there's also this misconception, you know, you get asked really weird questions if you go to a grocery store or like go get a coffee. So I think it just kind of all started. And earlier, you know, when I was still at school, a lot of the reporting I did was about international students. So they would get targeted for just being an international student. They would get charged more, 3 times more than their Canadian friends. And it's just, yeah, it just came all naturally to me. And I think, you know, it's unjust. So yeah, that was quite a journey. And Polestar, obviously, Kelly did a fantastic job sort of revealing a lot of issues there. And I felt really, I like her as a person, as a prof. So it was great working for her. Yeah.
Okay, so as a journalist, Lou, I'm wondering, did you know of the Maritimes before you came to Canada?
No. I wish I could say yes, but I did not know Halifax. I actually Googled, I think I searched Halifax on YouTube or Nova Scotia on YouTube, and apparently it means New Scotland or whatever. I think that's
right.
what I found, and it has a lot of bars. That's really all the things I knew before I came here.
Yeah.
But
did you, okay, and again, this is another question that I probably need to get my story behind to the Maritimes soon. It's the one part of Canada that I haven't spent much time in at all. But how's the Chinese food situation, and like is the grocery situation? Like, are you able to still enjoy your usual?
I might just move to Toronto for the food. Not gonna
Really?
lie. Just
I see.
I think we get most of our Chinese groceries, like the grocery store, the Asian grocery stores, they get most of their grocery from Toronto. So you pay more. It's like,
I see.
It's always cheaper in Toronto. If you, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, it's just like, if you buy like a hot pot stuff, it's always like expensive, more expensive than Toronto. I've heard this a lot in Toronto.
So a lot of it is shipped, I imagine, from bigger cities in Canada to Halifax. So logistically, it would they would add the cost to that. And mind you, Toronto is not as, let's say, it's actually quite expensive in terms of your Asian supermarkets compared to what you would have, say, out in Vancouver or even in the US. It's and Toronto is a big city. So I can't even begin to imagine how expensive it would be in Halifax. So just like Will, I will confess, that's a part of Canada that I need to know more.
Well, I don't know. I hope in the future, because Halifax is growing, I hope that the situation could change, because I would really like some cheap hot pot groceries. So
Yeah,
nice.
yeah. I remember, even just as a minor story here, like when I moved to Ottawa, again, Ottawa was not like any different than other cities, and there's a big TNT and down near you can go to, but it's just interesting how it affects like even some of the dishes you eat. Like here you in Vancouver, because we're so proximal to seafood, you're eating a lot of fish, you're eating a lot of crab, you're like doing a lot of hot pot, and then they're like it was more like potatoes and stuff. So I would start eating a lot of like tudousi and stuff, which is like a chopped potato dish. And I'm sure like that's big in the Maritimes too.
Apparently it's the hardest dish to cook.
It is trying to get the potatoes thin.
Yeah, people always get fooled by how simple it looks. It's actually really hard to cook.
Huh.
One of my favorite dishes still though. Have you had it before, LK?
I believe I have, yeah. In Toronto, it's a staple, but I didn't realize that there's a lot of work that comes with it.
Yeah,
as Lou properly described it, it's hard, but it's deceptive. You'd think it's simple.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, interesting story though, Lou, that you mentioned that you had this experience of going to the Maritimes and just like not knowing and searching it up. I had a similar story when I went to China as an international student. I ended up in Chongqing because I had no clue where Chongqing was, in China, and I just like Googled it and I realized there's 30 something million in the municipality, and I like had this whole like Hunger Games like impression of like all the different municipalities and worlds, and then just going there and immersing yourself. But I mean, coming to Halifax, what would you say was the greatest? Culture shocks, it's an interesting word, but what do you think was the most surprising thing of Halifax to you?
Oh my God, it's been 5 years. So Halifax was actually my first city. Like it's not like I jumped from Toronto or Vancouver or anything like that. Halifax was the only thing I knew about Canada. And before that, I was living in Melbourne, which is like, I don't know if you know this, but Melbourne has the best coffee. Not the best coffee, but they have really, really good coffee.
I know this, yes.
So as cheesy as it sounds, coffee really surprised me, not in a good way. When I was in Halifax, I remember I was on this major road called Spring Garden Road, and I had my first sip of Tim Hortons. Everybody I knew then was raving about like Tim Hortons, and this is the Canadian version of Starbucks and everything, it's really good, you have to try it. And I had my first sip and I literally just like froze on Spring Garden Road, and I was like, oh my God, this is not so good.
You're right about the coffee. Absolutely, Lou. I haven't been to Melbourne, but I travel around Asia, and they have Australian chains over in Jakarta, in Manila, in Singapore, and their coffee is outstanding. So that must have been quite the shock, transitioning from a proper European style, short, thick espresso, at a minimum of 20 psi for bar pressure, to a double double. And no offense to, folks who love Tim Hortons, I would occasionally have my double double. But if you're kind of coming from a, sorry to put it this way, coffee snob city like Melbourne, that must have been quite the contrast.
It was definitely something. I did not even know what double double means until like I got my first cup. Yeah.
It's really interesting. Let's talk a bit about China before we get to the question of sort of Chinese immigrants. Like, I'm always curious because I see China from my window as someone who spent time largely as an outsider or tourist there, but as someone who grew up in China during a transitory period in China. What are some of your childhood memories? And maybe tell me a bit about your hometown.
Yeah, I grew up like, I'm in my late 20s. So I grew up when China had this 改革开放. So they were already like opening up to the rest of the world. And I grew up in Jinan. So that's a really kind of small but and big, like big for Halifax, but small in China, a city there. Growing up, it was like, I grew up in the city. Everything was sort of kind of crammed together. Maybe not like Hong Kong crammed, but like still pretty crammed. Apartment buildings, condo buildings, and all that. And I went to local schools. It was really competitive. That's one thing I wanted to highlight, by the way. Like, it's just how my upbringing can be really different from a Canadian friend of mine. Like, I grew up reading literally nationalism stuff. Like, I was good at it too. Like, I thought that was what politics was all about. And I was a strong believer. So every single day I remember we were talking about, how evil Japan is, and the classic education, it's really ingrained in my mind growing up. I remember even when I was in elementary school, we started this campaign to stop purchasing anything that's Japan produced. So that part always, I mean, now looking back, it doesn't feel right. But at the time, it was really something that I was fed every single day, and I believed it. I don't know if that's a little bit heavier than like what you asked. Like, I think looking back, that's really the only thing I remember. It's just how I have to believe the party. I have to believe that that's the only solution. That's the only party that can rule. And I remember having this debate with my friends, and I was trying to convince her that you're wrong. CCP is really the only thing that can lead us. And it's weird not to think about it.
And did that change while you were already in China, or did it take leaving China to go to Australia and then starting to like get access to some of the media and histories and other things that maybe changed that for you?
I think it really started changing after I went to college, because I studied in Chongqing, still in China, but I took English literature. So I really started to learn the language, and we had as a student there, we had access to New York Times and a lot of just foreign magazines, newspaper that a lot of my Chinese friends won't have or won't bother to read. And believe it or not, there are people who don't believe in CCP within China as well. Mm-hmm. So I think I was exposed to that a little bit, and it's a gradual process. But I think it all kind of exploded after I went abroad, and I went to Australia, and my whole world really changed, and I was able to read a lot, learn a lot, and just really overturn a lot of the beliefs I used to have. it was a painful realization. You basically need to realize that a lot of the things you have believed for years, they're wrong. Yeah.
And actually, sorry to draw us back, but given we were both, now it all makes sense when you talk about hot pot, that, you spent significant time in Chongqing, which if anybody thinks they know hot pot, you have to really spend time in Chongqing to know hot pot. Where did you go to school in Chongqing, may I ask?
Yeah, so I went to CSU. That's the Sichuan International Studies University. Did I say that right?
Okay.
Yeah, so they do like a lot of like, basically I think their major thing is like language, and they have a lot of international students from all over the world. So you get to really see a lot of people that are not Chinese, and you get to talk to them. I think that changed me a little bit too.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, being in Chongqing, I was there on exchange with the University of Ottawa with several non-Chinese classmates. I think I was actually the only ethnic Chinese person among the exchange. I went to the Southwest University of Political Science and Law, so SUPL.
Oh yes,
But Chongqing is, actually, LJ, you're in San Francisco now. I think like that's my comparator, is like it's the San Francisco of China, like very, very mountainous. The weather, everyone's like in good shape because you have to climb like crazy stairs and mountains to get anywhere. But the hot pot is next level, and you're gonna probably pass out from the heat eventually. So Lou, you mentioned going to Australia and then ending up in Canada. Tell me about Australia. I think one of the things that gets a bit misunderstood, we have a lot of Canadians who end up going to Australia for like law school and medical school and different things, but the number of individuals around the world who go to Australia, having navigated the Australian immigration portion of study student permits and stuff like that, what did you see that was different or similar to the Canadian system?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been fascinated by how, and you're the expert here, obviously, but I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of similarities, and for a period of time, I almost felt like Canada is copying Australia, because Australia, it's harder to immigrate to Australia now, I think, than before. And just policy-wise, I feel like Canada is still like a little bit more immigration friendly. Whereas in Australia, maybe the system is easy to navigate, but they don't really have such a great demand right now, at least not when I was there. So the immigration system there was like, you really need to fit a certain profile. So they were really looking for certain occupations like accountant or early childhood teachers. And that happens in Canada too, obviously, but I just feel like there's a greater demand. It seems like there's a greater demand here in Canada than in Australia. And the Chinese students, the tension is stronger in Australia between the Chinese students and the local students, and probably just local government in general. But yeah, I think that's mainly the biggest thing I noticed.
Interesting. And transitioning now to Canada, like being a journalist, writing and studying the issues, but also having to live it yourself with the actual immigration process. How has that been like for you? Does it spur your writing? Does it make it more challenging knowing that you know more than probably the average international student does about the process, given how much you went to research and studying it?
I thought it would help. I've been reporting on immigration for a while now, and I never really thought I would have like a lot of challenges. I won't say like I won't have any challenge, but like I still like, it's still perplexing for me. Like I still get confused a lot of the times, and I've even thought about maybe I should hire somebody to do this for me, because it's just, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's Kelly who said that about like a Canadian immigration. It's like, you really don't know what you don't know until you're faced with the challenge and you realize you forgot something, or is this not what you think. So yeah, and that's why the podcast that you're doing and like reporting on this is so important, because I think there's a gap there. I think there's a communication gap there between potential immigrants and and the system, the government.
And speaking of conflicts and misunderstanding, I want to know, just on take a few steps back, what are the, if you could identify three of them, what would be the three myths of newer Chinese immigrants to Canada that you would highlight?
Ooh, I think the first one is still like we came here with money. Some of us did, but a lot of us, we came here as international students. We're probably not poor, trying to find the right word, but we're definitely not crazy rich. I think that's the biggest misconception, that people have. The second one is probably just how quiet we're supposed to be, quiet and hardworking, the kind of very, very traditional view on Chinese students, immigrants, and all that. And the truth is, we are complicated too. We have very different background. My story might be completely different from someone who's also like from China. And like we're complicated with different, we might look similar to a lot of Canadians, but we really are different from each other. So the third one is probably how we don't want to get involved. I think that a lot of the times, we were invited to the party, but we really, I feel like people are not really trying to engage us, like, trying to like strike up a conversation with us or really trying to make us feel like we're part of the team. Maybe that's because we're still, I'm in Halifax. I've never experienced life in Toronto. So I don't know what it's like there or in a bigger city. But here, I still feel like there's a separation between the newer communities and like the local community here.
And in BC, in Vancouver, just to give you another context, we have the separation between even waves of immigrants, right? The newer from China versus those who came from the Hong Kong in the 80s to then those before that who came, multiple generations. And sometimes I would say the narratives oftentimes, the ironic thing is like the same thing that the communities experienced like 50, 60 years ago, the racism from white folks is being reproduced to the next community by the community that experienced it, right? And that's a very common sort of theme. So, don't let the door hit you on the way out, sort of.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question. If that sort of wave-related immigration, like interwave, dynamic existed in Halifax, but perhaps the community is not as dense as Vancouver or BC to have that kind of animosity.
Yeah, it's definitely not that much. Here mainly people are younger, generally younger. You don't really see that kind of generation thing. That being said, I do have a friend. He's like 80 years old. Like he's super old, and he experienced a cultural revolution. He comes from a completely different background, and he often gets into these fights with like younger Chinese immigrants and students because they have just some really different background stories. So you see a little bit of that, I guess, but that's really rare. You really don't see that a lot here.
So I know for me personally, I would say the last few years has probably been the most difficult. I wouldn't say I experienced the most racism because obviously they're, with entering the legal profession and things that, we've done that I would say allow us to code switch and integrate with those communities. But in terms of speaking about politics or about, issues that are affecting our community, I've had to watch what I say probably more than I ever have because of what's going on right now between, China and Canada, all of the recent news and Canadians arrested abroad there, Meng Wanzhou here. How has that affected you personally? Like, do you sense that tension when you in the community when you're asked or when you talk about China?
Yeah, so I definitely do. I blocked probably over 20 people on WeChat because they're just crazy. I can't bear seeing that. I don't know if you are familiar with like WeChat.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of articles are censored, and the only thing you can see, you're allowed to read, are really just, you know, propaganda. They're just one-sided. I wouldn't even call it journalism. And I have a lot of people, well-educated friends on there, and they read that, and they are in Canada, so I feel the heat from them, and just they've been reading these stories, fabricated stories sometimes, on WeChat about what's been going on, and it's like, what's the closest comparison? It's like having, I mean, if you live in the States and you're a liberal, and then you have a lot of friends who are Trump supporters. It breaks families, breaks up families. It you know, it destroys friendship. It's kind of a little bit like that with what's been going on between China and Canada. And it's so complicated, so complicated. I don't think I had, you know, even if we had an hour, I don't think we can like properly address it, but it's definitely a lot of tension there, and a lot of misinformation there. And one thing that bothers me constantly is that excuse me, is that Canadians and my Chinese friends, they always mix CCP and the people. They always think they're the same. So the Canadians would think if you are saying something that's bad about the party, you're being racist, potentially, you know, thinking that, you know, that's the party is like, we voted for the party. I'm like 28 years old. I've never voted for anybody in China. I didn't have like that opportunity. And then I have a lot of patriotic Chinese friends who believe that the party is the country. So that's a little bit complicated, but in, you know, in short, like it's been a lot of tension going around.
I completely feel you, and I think that one of the things that is misunderstood, and again, looking at China as a monolith is probably the biggest mistake you can do. You know, that politically there might be some forces that want it to appear as a monolith, either from the side of criticizing it or the side from, you know, of course, the CCP side. But within China, like you'll be in taxis having conversations with taxi drivers, you'll be in dinner tables, and it's the kind of stuff we talk about. I mean, it would surprise a lot of people here who, and maybe disappoint them, who want to paint this like we're all spies narrative of people, right? But I mean, that's you're either with us or against us narrative, unfortunately, has sort of increased in the last little bit. And I think a lot of us have much more complicated stories to tell and need to tell.
Yeah.
It's ultimately the people itself that need to tell it.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, that's really the problem. It's just a lot of the stories are told by people who don't really understand us. You see like a lot of reporting on China, like international, you know, China, like correspondents in China, and they don't really, they have, like, they could be really great journalists, and they are, but still I feel like we need more people who understand the culture, who understand the country, to like tell the story, to sort of like battle that misinformation. I'm really excited. Like I'm curious. I want to know, like you mentioned that you were in Chongqing for a little bit.
Yeah.
So what did you miss? What do you miss the most?
Ooh, good question. And I love how this podcast is turning into BB. I love it.
We're back to our usual MO of having food at the end, aren't we?
I mean, I miss my, I guess it would be grandma-in-law, because it's my spouse's grandma's home cooking in Kaishan, like just the home cooking and everything grown, like, you know, organically and in the yard, that kind of, you know, chickens from the back, you know, that kind of food is definitely what I miss. I miss xiaomian. I'm a huge noodle person. I think like you'll catch me sitting on a stool eating xiaomian like every morning. That's my thing.
Spicy?
Yeah. Oh, extra spicy. Like I can eat it. I can go to the max, and I'll eat afterwards. But no, that's the one thing. And I think Philippine, I mean, LJ, you're gonna probably connect with me on this. Like, we need better savory breakfasts in Canada, generally speaking. Right? Like,
yeah.
Really? No,
this is true. I mean, the most you can get is the bacon and eggs, right? Like
eggs and bacon and bread, and maybe
you know what? Yeah, you know what? Canada's improving in that department. I was just listening to the radio the other day, and on my way back home, I overheard an ad on the CBC on Radio One, and they were advertising like the breakfast choices in Toronto. And they were talking about all the ethnic options that you have for breakfast. Just beyond the usual bacon and eggs, right? But you're right. It's a work in progress. It's happening. I will have my tapsilog. You probably had it before. And just for a benefit, Lou, it's basically like strips of beef, very, very salty,
Okay.
in fact. And it's cured in your fridge for like days and in garlic, salt and pepper, and lots of soy sauce. Not good for the health, really, but very good for the soul.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's so funny.
the solution, I think, and I know municipal health inspectors all over the world will entirely disagree with me. It's probably not all over the world, but in Canada, is you got to remove the door and the window. You got to push out the carts a little bit to the streets. And you got to stop thinking our food's going to cause you instant diarrhea, because that's on you because you haven't eaten enough different foods around the world.
Hey,
Right?
I'll have you know that in Singapore, they have their foods out in the open.
Yeah, but there's a long history. I mean, Chinatowns, they used to police Chinese businesses like, cooked meat stores with their rules, saying that meat had to be cooked a certain temperature, and it would just destroy businesses. So I think we should explore doing like removing that, because if you can get bowls for like $1 each in the morning, you can solve a lot of food crisis problems, right? Because people can eat like cheap food and kill themselves, right?
I used to survive on $1.50 in Singapore for my breakfast. Coffee,
Singapore's
eggs, and
yeah. What do you miss from Chongqing, Lu? Like, what is your?
Actually, you kind of had my answer. Like, I'm a big noodle person. I can eat noodles like all day, all week. And I like it not spicy because I'm from Shandong.
Yeah.
We also like starchy food and stuff, but the only difference is like we don't like it spicy, we like it salty. So xiaomian is actually my favorite, but I like it without the spice, without the chili and
Are you getting it plain, or are you getting it with feitang, or are you getting with like, what are you getting it with? What's your?
Oh yeah. It just qingtang, so it's just like
Oh, you like the clean
noodles. I like it clean. I like
nice.
like the noodle itself. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. How did you survive like meals with like colleagues then, going from like the different tastes? But I'm sure you have to have some really bad ones. Like, can I have my side dish on the side, or my water to like dip it into it or whatever?
I had one dish for a whole month when I first went there.
Wow.
Because everything else was spicy. But after a year, I became like, I have to eat like chili with my food.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
like Will, I'm at the max level when it comes to spicy too. So
yeah.
I was gonna say, actually, if you're a big noodle person as well, I was gonna recommend it, but apparently I can't now because you're not into spicy stuff. But if you do dare venture that way, this is my Southeast Asian roots betraying me. Indomie, those instant noodles that you'll easily find in Asian supermarkets or even small stores. Indomie is the bomb.
Classic, yeah. Indomie, yeah, that's classic. And it's not that spicy. I mean, it's not like your Korean spicy noodles.
It's not. No, you're right.
I love how this has devolved into like food conversation, because clearly LJ and I are hungry. You're at like 10 p.m. You're gonna have like Ishao soon, probably. Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Yeah, no, I think it's I'm grateful that we have someone who is able to speak their truth on this podcast, and I think that is something. I mean, regardless of where your family's histories lie, and your own opinions on the conflicts between the countries, or on the Chinese Chinese immigrant story generally, I think it's more important that we are able to share in dialogue our different journeys and pathways to our various forms of enlightenment, because holding and bottling the stories in us can cause a lot of harm. And I think that's something that unfortunately the community has experienced. Yeah. Well, this has been an incredible episode. Unfortunately, we don't have a game for you, but next we're definitely going to get you back on for a game night, or maybe like a virtual hotspot or something. We'll need to do something for sure. We're thinking actually about doing like an episode that's like a virtual hotpot. And of course, if you ever want any of us on either of us on your podcast, we're happy to reciprocate at any time.
I will actually take you up on that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Awesome. Okay.
All right.
Thank you for a great
Well,
episode.
thank you so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You guys have a
Connect
good
soon.
night.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. All right, that was quite an interesting conversation. I like the fact that it talked about like diversity in terms of like food choices and options. How there's not much in certain parts of Canada, how there's a lot in certain parts of Canada, but at the same time, it's also about the diversity in views and the diversity of what you'll find in China, for example. Because you're right, it's so easy to slip into that monolithic view of there is only one China, for example, that everything in China is the same. Everyone's still wearing the Mao era pre-cultural revolution uniforms. That's no longer true. And, it might be to the advantage of whichever side you're at that we paint China in that way. And I really, really like the fact that Lou has in her Twitter profile that, people of China not equal the CCP, because that's absolutely true. It's so easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just being able to see a young, incredible, Chinese journalist, podcaster speak her truth is so important. Like, we've been having to adjust what we say to the palette of those who want to paint us a certain way for far too long. And I think it's great that just seeing a different perspective on our show, seeing a perspective that might change a few opinions about, even a Chinese person in the Maritimes, or, that we can't speak our truth. We can. It just takes a little belief and a little space and a little healing on our parts to do so. And I think yet, we can still, even if we disagree with each other, be at the same table and talk about really complicated issues and not have to turn it into a polarized fight necessarily. So I'm grateful for this conversation with you, LJ. Thank you for being part of it. I know I felt the same way when I joined your talk on the Philippines with Jonah. And I feel like it's very, another similar one where we're just really exploring each other's cultures. So getting to know each other better. And that's great. And it's been a wonderful time.
Absolutely. No, I had a lot to learn today.
I gotta hug my baby soon because my baby and my mother is crying. So, but thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We're gonna be back next week. We're gonna keep putting out fresh content, and we hope that we can, bring some more conversations that you're not used to in your day-to-day life. So, thank you.
Thanks for listening, guys. Have a good one.